Welcome to Scrubbed In, the DVM Journey, the podcast where we dive into the wild, rewarding, and sometimes unpredictable world of becoming a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. I'm your host, Grace Gaynor, a current second-year veterinary student at Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine. Whether you're an aspiring vet, a vet student, or just passionate about animals, this is your backstage pass into becoming a DVM. From classroom to clinic, we're sharing the insights, tips, and real-life experiences to help you thrive on your journey to becoming a vet. So scrub in, and let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of Scrubbed In. I'm your host, Grace Gaynor, and today I'm super excited to welcome Dr. Jacque Pelzer, who is the Assistant Dean of Student Affairs and Admissions here at the Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Pelzer, thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, I know you have had a very unique journey to vet school and that you were actually a pro surfer prior to becoming a veterinarian. Can you shed some light on that and tell us about your journey to veterinary school?
Sure, and I actually really love my story a lot because I think it speaks to prospective students that there's no shame in failure. So I'm going to talk about failing.
Love that.
And that's how we all develop a growth mindset. But I graduated high school when I was 15 and went away to college when I was 16.
Wow.
And had never dated when I was in high school.
Yeah.
And I went to a very small 2-year program here in Virginia, which is actually located in moonshine capital of the world, and had never been around boys or alcohol really, right? And so being away from home at that young age, I didn't always make the best choices and actually left that program with a 0 GPA.
Wow.
Yep. And went home, and my mother said, well, I think you need to grow up a little bit. And I'm pretty adventurous. So I moved to Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, and started surfing. And I worked at a local surf shop and eventually owned that surf shop. And lived there for about 5 to 6 years, I guess. But I did surf professionally while I was there. We made surfboards, and it was just a really great experience. It was a great way for me to learn about myself and what I was capable of. And I had always wanted to be a vet. I was that typical story when you're 5 years old, bringing home animals, that kind of thing. And as much as I loved being at the beach, I just didn't mentally feel challenged so much. I was physically challenged for sure, but I decided that I wanted to go back to college and give it another go. I did a major in biology at Virginia Commonwealth University, graduated top of my class. Wow. So it just goes to show that, at the right place, the right time, and with the right support that we can be successful. While I was there, I had a professor that really inspired me. He studied drugs of abuse, and so I did my master's with him before going to veterinary school. But that's kind of been my journey.
Wow, that's super cool.
Yeah.
And then where did you go to vet school?
I went to vet school here at Virginia, Maryland. So I'm an alum as well as an employee now. After graduation, I opened my own food animal ambulatory practice here in Southwest Virginia and did that for about 12 years. My husband, and you know my husband very well as well, so Dr. Kevin Pelzer was faculty here at Virginia, Maryland. He was diagnosed with colorectal cancer when I was in practice, and we had a 10-month-old at the same time. And he came pretty close to not surviving his cancer. And it was just really difficult for me to be a solo practitioner, raising a daughter and having a sick husband. And so at the time I decided to step back from private practice and stayed home with him until he healed.
Yeah. What an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that so candidly. I absolutely love that you mentioned how you came back from failures in your life. I think that's something that a lot of us face in our lives, is coming back from failures, and I think it really defines you as a person when you face those failures, how you can overcome them.
And I've worked with veterinary students long enough that there's so much shame in failure.
Yes.
And there really shouldn't be. I know it feels terrible because you want to make it through veterinary school and you're working so hard, but we're not going to win at everything. There's just no possibility for that to occur in our lives, but it's what we learn on that journey. And at the time I felt terrible. I felt stupid. And I I did need that time away, I think, from school to mature a little bit. But
yeah, absolutely. Definitely shame is a hot topic and something that we don't really talk about, I think, enough as veterinary students and veterinary practitioners, but definitely something that I know I've experienced and I know a lot of students have. And sometimes it's hard to put a name to what you're feeling, and that is shame. It's something that we have so deeply ingrained in us sometimes, but it's hard to name that and face it too.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about how you became a practitioner, a food animal practitioner with your own practice, and then you transitioned back into administrative role when your husband had cancer. What have your responsibilities been in your administrative role here at Virginia, Maryland?
Yeah, and even how I acquired this position
Yeah.
is interesting. So a part-time position opened up here at Virginia Tech over in the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences in their animal and poultry science major, and they needed a pre-vet advisor.
Okay.
And it was a part-time position. I thought, well, why not, right?
Yeah.
And I loved working with pre-vet students. They were so motivated, enthusiastic, and
Yeah.
remind me every day actually about why I went into veterinary medicine. But
Right.
at that time, the individual, his name was Dr. Mike Reardon, who was in my position at the veterinary school, reached out to me and said, hey, I think you'd be great at this job, and I'm getting ready to retire. So I did everything that I could to take advantage of being here at the university and preparing myself for that leadership and administrative role. However, I was so naive about academia, but I did get the job. I interviewed for the job, and Dr. Jenny Hodgson was here at the time as associate dean, and we actually started at the same time, but very, very naive about what it meant to be in academics. And it's actually, I've been here 18 years now, and it's actually taken that long for me to really feel comfortable in my skin here at the school.
Interesting.
But every day looks different. Every day looks different in this position.
Yeah. And what are some of your responsibilities?
Yeah, so
I know you have so many.
yeah, so admissions is actually a really small part of what I do.
Okay.
But we've certainly advanced our admissions process into the future. I say we're internationally recognized for our admissions process because it is very different. It's a very different way of looking at candidates, and so I'm really proud of that accomplishment. When I first started, we had about 800 applicants. Last year, we had close to 2,600. So we've really taken the program far there. I have oversight of all the clinical year as well.
Yes.
So I do, clinical year scheduling, making sure students are having a good experience in the clinic and evaluated. And so that's probably a larger portion of my job. But honestly, every day is putting fires out. And you have to be able to problem solve and those types of things.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely going to come back to the admission process, but I do want to ask you, how do you use your DVM degree specifically in this role?
Yeah, it's hands down, it's problem solving.
Solving.
Yeah, and even, I would say even food animal practice probably prepared me for this because you're out in the field, you don't have access necessarily to Google Doc or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to really be able to handle things in the moment, and that's what every day is like for me.
Yeah.
Students have life going on outside of college. We never know what's going to happen to them, and it can be anywhere from the loss of a parent or spouse to even their own physical and mental health that's impacting their ability to move through the program, and so we have to figure out pretty quickly on how to turn things around.
Yeah. So interesting. Well, I know that I speak from experience when I say this, but I appreciate how you and the administration have helped at least me with my own personal physical challenges. So I know that is a huge part of your role, and I know that you, like you said, on a day-to-day basis have to deal with those challenges, but we're really grateful that you have. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
What are some positives and negatives of working in academia?
So I've stayed in this position for as long as I have because of the students. Hands down, that's probably the most enjoyable part of my job. I just, even when it's a negative interaction with a student, I try to figure out why they're having a negative experience and whether I can change that for them. And sometimes I can't, but sometimes I can, right? But it's just the students. I mean, I really have love. I mean, I describe it as love for the students in our program.
Yeah.
I'm tearing up right now thinking about leaving, but so that's been the most positive piece. I think also collaborating with faculty has been very rewarding for me, and really trying to change veterinary education, so the way that you all are taught. The negatives, again, being an administrator has a lot of negative responsibilities as well. It's telling a student no, it's holding students to policies and procedures, standards.
Yeah.
It's having difficult interactions with other administrators. And, I'll use our dean maybe as an example, is that I don't always agree with him, but I understand that as a dean, he has a lot of difficult responsibilities and decisions to make.
Right.
And I don't know that I would want his job for sure. But that can be frustrating sometimes when you're trying to help students or a colleague.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you shedding light on that, because I can imagine that that's difficult. And it's also probably something that, obviously not the same challenge, but challenges that we face as practitioners when we're trying to work on the same team as a client and maybe not seeing eye to eye with them on how to do something or how to solve a problem. So
yeah, that's a really great example.
Yeah. So I asked some of my fellow classmates to maybe pitch into some questions. So this is a question from Cole, and he would like to know, how much transparency do you think is needed as an administrator to be successful without leaving those who are being administered to in the dark?
Yeah, Cole. Thanks for that, Cole. I think there needs to be a lot of transparency.
Yeah.
There's some things that we can't share specifically about a student or a circumstance, and I know that can be frustrating. And in fact, thinking about Cole, I believe that was his experience during his first year, that there was a situation and we just couldn't share everything about how things were being resolved. And that was to protect the confidentiality of students. But I think there needs to be as much transparency as possible. I believe that, like, for example, I'll use our curriculum board, our curriculum committee as an example. There are student representatives on that curriculum board, and we do talk about things that are very confidential. But I think there needs to be transparency about how and why we reached a decision that we did.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so true. And I know that we're very grateful that you have been here in this role and giving us transparency as much as you can. I know that I think I speak on behalf of the students when I say that I think we feel that from you as an administrator, so we really appreciate that. And I do think it's important, like you mentioned. So,
and you all are much more savvy than when I went through veterinary school, right? So I graduated in 1997, put my age out there. But back in the day, we just did what we were told. We didn't question anything. But you all are consumers, right? And are paying for an education, and you deserve a good education, and you do deserve to know why we do things the way we do. So I applaud you all on standing up for yourselves and wanting to know why we make those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And as veterinarians and veterinary students, we're taught to think critically. So sometimes that impacts how we see other things besides just veterinary medicine, which I think is important, absolutely. So, but let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the admission process here at Virginia, Maryland. I know you are transitioning out of this position, but as it stands, can you explain to our listeners what is the current admissions process here at Virginia, Maryland?
That's one thing I never forgot when I was applying to vet school, was that process. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed like things just went down a black hole. And I did not want that to be the experience of our applicants. So I think that we are very transparent with our admissions process. I mean, that's why our website, I think, is a little too busy, but we've got a lot of information out there that's important to an applicant's success. And I felt this way myself, and I know that pre-vet students feel this way, is that we feel like we're only being judged on our grades and not me as a whole person or you as a whole person, right? And there is so much more to all of us than just our grades. So we created, and I really don't like the word holistic, but that's the only word that I feel like I could use that would be appropriate. But we're actually looking at an individual within the context of their own life. We're not really comparing Sally Joe to Jim Bob, right? We're not doing that. We're looking at just Sally Joe's life and what we call distance traveled. Mm-hmm. So her journey on this pathway to veterinary medicine. Certainly when we're looking at academics, and it's 55% of our process is, there's a ranking there, but we're looking at everyone, and we're looking at, what achievements, what failures they've had in their life, because failures are important too. That's kind of a symptom or sign of resiliency, right? And so we're looking just at that individual. We also moved to what we call a competency-based admissions process. So rather than just looking at the number of hours that somebody spends in a veterinary practice, is okay, what did they learn while they were there, right? And we can't compare working at a veterinary clinic in Richmond, Virginia to Seattle, Washington, right? We can't even compare that. So we're looking at, okay, well, what did you learn from those experiences, right? And we now look at things like written and oral communication, decision making, and that decision making is really within the context of their life. Did they choose to work as a waitress in the summer, or did they choose to go on safari in Africa, even though maybe they couldn't have afforded to do that, right? So, what good choices are you making in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the distance traveled. I think that's so important. I know for me specifically, as a person that was in college during COVID, I know I struggled a lot, and I'm just going to put this out there with my grades, because I was in a lot of classes that were curved, and because we were at home, there were many people that were cheating. And so I was often feeling like, I'm going to be at the bottom of the curve, but I don't want my integrity to be compromised. And of course there was the question, do I take the pass-fail grade instead of actually having a letter grade? And I ended up electing to have all letter grades, because I was like, I want them to see me as I am. I want them to know that, maybe I got a B in this course or a C, but I didn't take the pass-fail. I want you to see what I actually did and what I learned. So I love that you said distance travel.
And that worked out great for you, didn't it?
It did work out. I'm so glad that I did it. It was more of an integrity thing than anything else, because it was hard for us too. We had to decide if we were going to do pass-fail before we even took the final. So it was kind of a gamble. You had no idea how you were going to actually end up in the class. And I said, you know what? Screw it. I want them to see me as I am. I don't want them to be wondering what I got pass-fail. So I know that it's a different situation for every student, but I am glad that I made that decision. So,
and integrity is one of the things that we measure on the applications as well. So
yeah. And for my cycle, please correct me if this has changed, but I believe on my cycle, we were offered an interview based on our application, and then we were offered admission solely based on the interview. Is that still the case?
Yeah, really great question. Yeah, so we are very invested in what we call the multiple mini interview, because we feel like everyone that we invite for an interview would be academically successful within the DVM program.
Right.
But we want to learn about all these other attributes, right? Because it's, again, not grades alone. And so we measure things like problem solving, decision making, ethical and moral judgment, teamwork. Those types of things are assessed on the multiple mini interview. So when candidates are invited to interview, their scores are set to 0, and they are accepted on the interview alone.
Yeah.
We didn't do that the first year that I was here, so that was in 2009. I think that I have noticed a huge shift in the class personalities.
Yeah.
And we aren't dealing with as many professionalism issues as we used to. The faculty even have told me that they feel that the classes are very different, and in a good way.
Yeah.
And seem a lot more collaborative. And it's not, I know that there's still competition, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't seem quite as much as it was before.
Yeah, I think that's a very unique part of the admissions here at Virginia, Maryland. I don't know if there are any schools that do it like that, but I know I appreciated having my interview be a really important part of the process, because I do think that communication is really important in this profession, and I felt like I was able to shine in mine, although mine was recorded, so it was a little bit different. I know they're doing some of them in person.
Yeah, we moved
now.
back to in person.
Yeah, and I think that's really nice to be able to talk with someone and come and visit the school, but I do think that for anyone who is thinking of applying to vet school, it is really important to start working on those interview skills now, because it will not only help you in the interview process, but also as a veterinarian and also as a veterinary student, working with other students on a day-to-day basis and communicating with faculty. So,
yeah, and we did add an additional tool. It's called a situational judgment test. So all of our candidates take that, all of our applicants, so it's part of the application review process. And it's interesting, the situational judgment test predicts a person's reaction or their behavior in a future situation. So where the multiple mini interview is assessing their attributes right now in their lives, right? So they are scenarios that they're not meant to be, like they have to make a clinical decision, but they could be within a veterinary hospital environment, right? And so an example of a scenario might be you're prepping for today's surgery and the surgeon walks in and you smell alcohol on his breath. What would you do, right? So that's a future situation.
Right.
There are a list of possible reactions in that particular scenario, and the candidate has to select what they feel would be the best one. So they rank them from 1 through 4. Depending on what they pick, number 1, they might not get full points, right? But at least they get points. Nobody gets a 0, but just depending on the ranking determines how many points you would get for each of those scenarios. So that's 10% of the initial application review.
Interesting. I don't know if I did that. Is that new?
Yeah, that's new.
Okay.
The results, I love data, right, to prove that we're doing a good job, and so the data is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then the situational judgment test did actually predict a candidate's performance on the multiple mini interview.
Interesting. Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And it's separate or in addition to the Casper, right?
Well, we don't do Casper anymore.
You don't?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it's similar to the Casper though,
Yes.
but we didn't. So the Casper, I know a lot of schools use Casper. We didn't see the scenarios. We didn't know what kind of questions their candidates were answering, and we didn't see the individual scores. So we only got like a percentage score.
Yeah.
So we wanted to be more engaged in that process. So the group that we're working with now is actually located in the UK in London. They're called the Work Psychology Group, and they've been doing this for a really long time in medical education. I help with creation of all the scenarios. We pilot them before we use them, and so it's been a really positive experience for me.
Yeah, that's really cool. For anyone who doesn't know, I can try to explain the Casper a little bit. It's basically kind of similar to what she was explaining, where they give you a situation, and you have, 15 or 20 seconds to think of your response, and it's recorded, so then they record you speaking and talking about your response. But they have, I don't know who they select to rank or evaluate you, but they have a group of people evaluating you, and then they give you a score, and it's like 90 percentile, 70 percentile. It's kind of a big range. I know plenty of people in my class that scored quite low on it and still got into vet school, so it's kind of nice that you are picking the scenarios here so you can look at the responses and decide for yourself, for this institution, what kind of response you're kind of looking for. So I like that a lot. The Casper is an interesting test. It's similar, but I like that you can choose which response you kind of want to go with.
Yeah, and I understand didn't the Casper have a written response as well? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
I think it did. I think one of the scenarios you had to actually write out a response because we have some students that needed accommodations, so extra time, and they felt like they didn't have enough time to respond to that question. So,
yeah. Could be. I only remember the recorded part, but yeah, that makes sense, especially because you don't have a lot of time to think of your response and then respond. So, wow, very interesting. So you've been involved in this admissions process for quite some time. So what advice would you give to students who are applying to veterinary school?
I guess my number one piece of advice is to reach. So I love my students, love them. I love Grace, but and Grace you have a certain perspective of why you got in, but you don't really know the details of what you're right. I think it's really important for candidates to reach out to the admissions offices at the veterinary schools. I hear from prospective students that not all admissions offices are as maybe open and transparent as we are. And I've got 2 phenomenal staff members I want to give a shout out to, and that's Shelby Stegall and Cassie Davidson, who spend a significant amount of time talking to candidates, doing application reviews, giving advice, and that's what you should do, is reach out to these admissions offices. Maybe even plan a visit if they don't seem so willing to talk on the phone or Zoom, is make appointments to have your resumes reviewed, if you're in the application process right now, just to make sure that you're on track, that you're meeting all the requirements. If for some reason you're unsuccessful at getting in, is ask for an application review, hands down.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think that we should also normalize not getting in on the first try, because it really is a statistical battle. So
totally agree with that. And there's so many success stories that we've had actually here at our college. Dr. Fabrizi, who graduated, I believe, 2 years ago, he tried, and he doesn't mind me sharing this story, he tried 5 times.
Yeah.
He met with us after each cycle, and he made it in, and he's a phenomenal veterinarian. But you're right, and he was actually in our in-state pool, which is actually more competitive.
Yes.
So, for example, with Virginia, we had close to 500 applications for those 50 spots.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sad.
As a Marylander, what are the Maryland stats?
Yeah, pretty
typically?
close, actually.
Yeah.
So I think you all had about 300 for the Maryland seats, and there's 300. 30 spots. 30 spots, and so. And I mean, every year I dread hitting that button, right, with sending out the offers and declines, because that's when the emails start coming in about, I had one from a practitioner, we just love our technician and she deserves to get in, and we just don't understand, what you're doing to prevent her from, so when we want her to be successful too, it's just a numbers game, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that's really hard.
It's
in your
very
position.
Hard. Because I know what it feels like, again.
Yeah.
Not know why you're getting in or why you aren't getting in.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Well, if this is your dream, y'all, you got to keep going. You got to keep trying. So.
Because there's a place for everybody. There
Absolutely.
really is. And I think that's one thing, too, I want to really stress to your audience, is that don't give up. If this is your dream, don't give up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to leave it at that. Another question from one of my classmates. What are some elements of the most standout applications you have read?
Really great question. And it was not a safari in Africa.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, it was. So we do have, and I don't know if you remember, Grace, there's an essay where we wanted to know about how you've been resilient in your life.
Yeah.
And the stories that are shared with us are phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I think I can think of one particular essay, and he's graduated now, but he actually described his fat orange tabby walking down the hallway, and you know how they kind of get that udder action going with their abdomen, right? And he related that, though, to his own struggles with diabetes, and his cat actually had diabetes, but he caught us with that very first sentence. It wasn't, I've loved animals since I was 5 years old, or I found a lost kitten on a rainy night. It wasn't, it was just, it was kind of humorous at first, but then it got into a very serious tone. But those stories with the resiliency essays really stand out to us. It's not your grades, it's not your veterinary experience. And I really hate it for applicants, because it's that centralized application, right? All of our applicants have veterinary experience. Your experience, unfortunately, doesn't stand out from anybody else's. You just have it, right? And it's good that you have it and you've jumped through that hoop.
Yeah.
It's really your essay responses that stand out to the committee, and it's being very creative. If you're humorous, you should be funny in your response. If you want to be serious, you should be serious. The other thing, and we talked a little bit about it before, is there's no shame in sharing stories about mental health struggles, any physical struggles that students might have. Our committee, this is, to our school alone, we train our committee that none of that can be used to keep somebody out of the program, that those are stories that you're sharing. But if you're talking about a mental health challenge, that you should talk about going through that challenge, but what are you doing now to keep yourself healthy and on track?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you shared that too, because I know when I was sitting down to write that essay, I kind of struggled with whether or not it was going to be held against me if I shared some of the physical challenges I had been through. But I ended up writing it because it's an important part of my story. But I love that you mentioned that, because I do think that is probably something that runs through individuals' minds when they're applying. But if it's part of your story, then it needs to be written down, and that's what's going to set you apart from the next individual who's also applying.
And Grace, one thing I'll mention is that someone like you has taught me that individuals can have physical or mental health challenges and be wonderful veterinarians and get through the program. Yeah. And it's not for me to say what you're doing to adjust how you approach medicine. That's your approach, and that's not wrong or right, right?
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. Another question from one of my classmates. Shout out Allie, thank you for this question. Once students arrive at veterinary school, are there any attributes or skills that you think make students excel in school?
Yeah, Allie, thanks for that question. Again, I think it's resiliency. That transformation that happens from undergrad or even maybe a previous career in veterinary school is a phenomenal feat. It just is. Everybody's so happy they get into vet school, but they have no idea what's about ready to hit them, right? And and I think that's what some individuals really struggle with, even with support. They just they can't deal with the difficulties. It doesn't mean they don't have the aptitude or the intelligence. They just can't handle what's coming at them because they haven't prepared for it, right? So I think that's probably the biggest thing I can think of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important that you mention this, because I think it's important for anyone applying to vet school or when they're admitted and about to come, you need to recognize and tell yourself that this is going to be difficult. This is going to be one of the hardest things you may ever do. And if you tell yourself that and acknowledge it and recognize it, when you get here, you won't be surprised when it ends up being difficult. I know for me, I told myself this is going to be really difficult. I personally am not someone that picks up information very quickly. I have to work a lot harder than maybe another individual who picks things up quite quickly. And I knew that this would be a challenge for me. But because I told myself what was going to be involved, I told myself it was going to be hard, I wasn't going to come here and watch Netflix 6 hours a day, I was able to adapt when it started being hard, when it was hard on day one. Because I think that's really important, so that people, I just think preparing yourself mentally is really important. And maybe even like visualization too is so important for people, so that they are able to just come in with the right expectation.
And I'm all about manifestation. So I think, manifesting, what you think this experience is going to be like for you. And I think, too, the other thing for all of the prospective students that are out there is to have conversations with your family, too, about what vet school is going to be like. Because I have dealt with students before that weren't able to go home for maybe a special event in their family life, so maybe a grandmother's birthday, things like that, and the family actually gave them a really hard time about that and laid a lot of guilt. And the student had an exam that Monday that they really needed to study for. So I think having those conversations with families about, I'm not going to be able to come home all the time, and I might not be able to talk to you 30 minutes a day. It might be just a really quick 5-minute phone call, but please know I love you and I'm thinking about you and I need your support.
Yeah, that is really important. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier with shame, because I think that can be a really big factor and can build up over time and affect a student's performance. So I think having those conversations at the beginning of vet school is really important, like you mentioned. And I know that even though I've had conversations with my parents before about it, sometimes they don't really quite understand what's going on, but they've always been very supportive.
Well, they think we're so smart. I mean, I just remember my mom just saying, "Why did you get a C on that exam? You're really smart." And it's just really hard. And then you feel terrible because like, well, maybe I'm not so smart.
Maybe I'm letting my family down. Absolutely. I'd like to talk a little bit about the current veterinary students here at Virginia, Maryland. I'm a current second-year veterinary student here at Virginia, Maryland, and we're about to head into our first 5 clinical rotations this summer. And I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast are in the same boat. So what is your advice to all those students who are about to start, finally put down the textbooks and get in the clinic? What is your advice to them?
And big shout out to your class. Your class, and I'll just say this, your class is one of the classes that I feel so emotionally connected to. I don't know why, but your class is just wonderful. I've never experienced a class that was more collaborative. So shout out to 2027. I want you to breathe, and I want you to have fun. I know everybody's really worried about failing on clinics. You're not going to fail unless you do something like really egregious, like you just don't show up because you don't feel like it, right? That's you should probably fail for that. But the faculty are so excited to have you all in the clinic. And it's where things really come together and starts making sense to you out, that's why I learned it, and you get to apply it now in real time, right? You get to practice being a doctor in a very safe environment. It's probably, too, for some, it's going to be the first experience working in true healthcare teams. So our LVTs are really important to your education. They're the ones that really work with you most intimately in the clinical environment. They're there with you every step of the way, where the clinicians come in and go, right? They give you a lot of autonomy with your cases, and they'll sit down and go through them with you, but the LVTs are there like, we need to draw blood, and this is where it goes, and no, you shouldn't do it this way, you should do it that way, and helping you wrap your catheters the right way. So it's just enjoying the ride. Don't get so caught up in trying to be right all the time. please say you don't know when you don't know. Don't try to fake it, because they know that you're faking it. But just say, I'm really sorry, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, absolutely. What great advice, guys. We have to take this seriously, and we have to listen, because something that I've thought about through my entire life is sometimes you have to get it wrong to get it right. And I think that that's really important for us to remember going into this next season of our clinical training, because we don't have all the answers, like you said. We're not always going to know what the right thing to do is, but we have to just try and learn and fail. And this is our safety net. This is our safe space to get things wrong and to learn. So I know I'm really excited, but also nervous. But like you said, it's okay to mess up. And I think we should all remember that and be kind to our classmates if someone's messing up too,
and help each other. There's going to be really long nights for some.
Yes.
And I know, because I was a student here too, I didn't always understand, well, why do I have 5 cases and she only has 2, right?
Yeah.
But if you notice that about your classmate, it's like, hey, I'm going to do your 3 o'clock treatments because I know you have another appointment coming in, or I'll run the dog down to radiology. I know that you need to go look at the lab work. And I think your class actually will do that. You're going to really help support each other, because you do get tired. And then there's days too that maybe you don't have cases and you're thinking, well, why am I sitting here all day, right? But use that opportunity to look around. Does somebody need help?
Yes.
Or maybe I need to read ahead about a case before it comes in tomorrow. So.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to working with all y'all. I think it's going to be a great experience. And I think, like you said, we have a great class. And if anyone needs help, feel free to come find me, because I will be the person that helps you. So looking forward to it. I know that unfortunately you are transitioning out of your role here at Virginia, Maryland to a new role at a developing veterinary school called Rocky Mountain Vista.
Well, it's Rocky Vista University.
Rocky Vista University, located in Montana.
Yep, Billings, Montana,
Wow. What will your new role entail?
Yeah, so I'll be the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and Research at Rocky Vista. And as much as it saddens me to leave, I'll still be around, and I'm going to actually come to your class's graduation. But because it's a new school, I actually get to develop the curriculum, and I'm going to be very intentional and mindful about student mental health as I'm developing that curriculum, and really looking for more innovative ways to teach veterinary education.
Yeah, I love that. I know you talked a little bit about they are going to have a distributive model.
Yeah, so it's actually a 3-year program. So the first 2 years will be core curriculum, very much similar to what you're experiencing now.
Yeah.
And there'll be some electives. They won't have a tracking curriculum, but there'll be electives thrown in there so that you could focus in a species area that interests you most of all. But their entire 3rd year then will be spent at what we call clinical affiliate sites. Some of those will be other veterinary schools. Okay. Some will be specialty clinics, and then others will be general practices.
Yeah, awesome. Well, so excited to see what you do in that role. I know that they're lucky to have you, and you'll be in charge, kind of running the whole thing.
I will be in charge, under the dean.
I love that. That's so cool.
I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Pelzer, it has been my absolute pleasure to interview you today. I'd be remiss to not end without saying that we are absolutely so grateful to have had you here at Virginia, Maryland. You have made such a lasting impact on so many veterinary students that will truly transcend your time here. So thank you for everything you've done for us, and I truly believe we will all be better veterinarians because of it.
Thank you.
So thank you for your time. Well, everyone, my name is Grace Gaynor, and I just interviewed Dr. Pelzer, and we are Scrubbing Out.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Scrubbed In, the DVM Journey. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of our community of future vets and animal lovers. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. It helps others find the show and join the conversation. And if you have any questions or topics you'd love to hear about, feel free to leave us a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep scrubbing in, and remember, the journey to becoming a DVM is one step at a time.